Hello Reddit peeps. This video is for how to stack and make from beginning to end CCD images, mono CCD images specifically. So if you're shooting with a mono CCD or you're thinking about upgrading and you kind of want to know what the processing back end looks like, maybe this video will help you out. So I'm going to do my M101 data, of which I just did a deconvolution video earlier today. I'm going to jump to my AP folder. And here's my work in progress stuff. So what I have captured so far is one night, March 8th, of M101, and all the raw frames. There's 20-minute subs right here, so there's 15 keepable subs. I have another night of M101 Part 2, also HA, and there are, looks like 11 of those subs. And then one night I spent doing RGB, so let's see, that is March 10th. I have RGB subs. My raw data are all in here. So I have, let's see, it looks like about 23 keepers of blue. I think these data are already parsed, so looks like about 23 keepers of green. I think I took 27 total, if I remember properly, but 25 keepers of red. I could be a little bit more picky with my subframe selections, but whatever. Alright, so that's my data set that I'm going to work with. So the first thing I do when I stack my images is I make sure they look okay. So I use the blink tool and the statistics tool to do that. So you open up the blink tool in PixInsight, you pull up the subs that you want to blink through, the ones that you want to check out. So I'll just look at my HA as an example, but I do this with all the subs. So I open up my 15, and the blink tool is kind of neat because what it does is it opens up, it's kind of quick because it's the FITS file. It opens up every single file and does a screen stretch on it and then lets you kind of flip between them. So here's my HA data from one night, and I'll change my second to maybe a half second. When I hit play, it'll just play a little video of what each sub looks like one after the other. So frame 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see the noise jostling around. You can see there's a little meridian flip at the end there. Frame, what frame is that? Frame 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 9 gets flipped. And then 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 are all meridian flip. That's fine. I use this to just look at my subs, make sure they're round. If any of them look suspect, I'll say, oh, it's frame 3, I want to examine a little bit more closely. So I'll go to my frame 3, for example, and I'll say, what does frame 3 actually look like? I'll pull it up, screen stretch it. Maybe I'll zoom in and say, is that star really round? Do I really want to keep that one, etc., etc. So that's one of the ways that I kind of judge whether or not my subframes are worth keeping. The other way is through the actual measurement tool. So under script, let's see, is it a utility or is it a batch pre-processing subframe selector? This is a really cool tool as well. Actually, let me close out the blink tool real quick. Okay. Script, batch pre-processing, subframe selector, and you tell it a bunch of subframes. So here's M101 frames 1 through 15. They're actually already loaded from a previous time I was working on this. And you hit measure. When you hit measure, it'll give you a little table down here that you can then save as a CSV file, which I think you've already done, so let me pull that up. So I always like to save it as a separate CSV, so that way if I ever go back and look at it, I can say, ah, this is what I was working with. So here's an example. Subframe selector, I just save it as table, and this is part 2 only because it's just the table corresponding for this data set only. It's not the sum of all HA for this particular project. Okay, let's open it up. It gives you a bunch of properties here. You know, the one that I really pay close attention to, close this a little bit, is the full width half max and the eccentricity, right? So the eccentricity is, you know, how oval are your stars. For each particular optical train, I think there will be a reasonable number that you can see. What I do, well, this is because it's open office. Let me just quickly change this to number, and we'll do a couple of decimal places, should be fine. All right, so the weight, full width half max, this is in pixels, right? You can see maybe I have 1 or 2 subs that kind of stand out. 7.3, maybe I want to toss that. Eccentricity 0.4, 0.5, about across the board. 0.6, maybe I want to toss that. Maybe I want to look a little bit more closely at it. So you can use this type of tool to judge whether or not you want to keep the subs. And of course it gives you tons of data, right, about what you want to do with these subs. And I don't honestly know all the details of all this stuff. You know, obviously I know what the mean deviation is, but I'm not sure that's a terribly useful thing. Signal noise ratio, weighted, that's pretty handy. You can see they're all pretty much about the same as each other. All right, so I've already decided to keep all my subs. Yeah, that's fine. So once I know that I'm going to keep all my subs, and I do this for both HA sets and the RGB set, I use the batch pre-processing script. So it basically, you just pile in all your stuff and it cranks it out. It's pretty awesome. So I have a bias library, so I can hit add bias, or I can just hit add files right here. My bias library I keep right here, and it's with my QSI camera. I've already made a master, so I just say here's my master. I have a darks library as well, so I go to add darks, and I go to my darks library, and since I have 20-minute subs, I'm going to use the 30-minute dark master. That's this guy. Flats, despite what some people may say, I found it to be okay that you take one set of flats and then use them over and over again more than one night. Some people, and strictly speaking, you probably should take flats every single night. I'm lazy and I don't like to do that. I just make sure that I put my camera in the exact same orientation relative to the scope, and as long as I do that, I don't seem to have too much problem, and I can reuse flats over and over again. When I do that, I have to use my flats library, which is here, and I've already made a master. Now I have two different camera orientations, a normal orientation, and then I have one where I use a focal reducer, and I rotate the camera 90 degrees counterclockwise. That's what the little 90cc is. Because the flats are unique for each filter, I got to use all those, right? Actually, I don't need the LUM filter because I don't have any LUM shots, but I do need the rest of them. So I need this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and that one. So we'll add those. See, it says, and it identifies, as long as it's properly in the metadata of the FITS file, what filter you're talking about, so it knows to apply it to the right one. And then last but not least, your lights. So I go to my lights, and I just pile them all in. So I go to my AP, where the files are stored, part 1, raw data, all those guys. And it recognizes that it's HA. Do it again. Part 2, raw data, pile them in. And since they're both HA, it just kind of puts it in one list. You can see this just says M101, but then this says M101 P2 for part 2. And I'm going to do the same thing for the RGB. I'll jump to part 3, 101, part 3, raw data, all the blues, greens, and reds. Select all, open, and it divides them up by filter. So it's really nice. So there's the reds, the greens, and the blues, right? So when I hit registration reference image, this basically says which of these do you want to select as the one we're going to match all the rest of them to. Since all mine are pretty much exactly the same, I'm just going to arbitrarily pick one. So that one looks good. The output directory, make sure you don't pick an HA one, by the way, if you're doing HA-RGB, because HA sometimes has less data, so it might not always be able to find the reference properly, but a blue frame usually has plenty of data in it. The output directory is where you want to save all this information, so I'm working with all the data from part 1, 2, and 3, so usually what I do is I just say this is version 3, and I'll put everything in there, so I'll select that as a folder. There's a little diagnostics button that says, are you doing things right? If everything looks good, it'll say no problems. If things don't match up, it'll give you some errors, like, for example, bias frames. Winsorized signal clipping requires at least 8 images. Oop, I didn't tell it that I'm using a master. So I'm telling it I'm using a master bias, dark and flat. See? Now everything's good. I just hit run, and it'll crank it out. It will calibrate for meridian flips. It will match them all up to this particular blue frame. It'll register all them. It'll keep all the registration files. I'm not going to actually do this right now because it takes a little bit of time. And when you're done, you'll get something that looks like this. Here's the HA registered. So you take all the HA frames, 1 through 15 and 1 through 11, and it tacks on this little subscript R. Subscript R means that these particular files have been registered to whatever file you're talking about. In this case, blue frame 3. So okay, once it's registered, I can do those. The data are the exact same. It's just that the software knows that this file lines up to this other file appropriately. Okay, so once you're done with that, you have a master. Let me go back to my part 3, which is where it's stored. And I think in version 1, it'll give you 3 folders: calibrated, master, and registered. Registered has the little subscript R, and the not subscript, underscore R for registered, and then underscore C for calibrated, meaning the flats have been applied. So it does that for each one, so you can see the individual calibrated and registered file if you care about that. I never bother to look at it. I just jump straight to the master and I open them up. Right. So once this is done, we'll pretend that I just did this. It will give me these three guys right here. You jump to master, and here's the RGB masters. So I'll just crank them open. I'll screen stretch all of them, take a look at it, make sure the stacking process actually worked. Looks good. Looks good. You can see the blue line from when they didn't match up properly, or the black line. And looks good. Okay, so they all stack. They're not all streaked and smeared and weird shit going on. They all pretty much, line up right on top of each other. So I can do this, and that's cheap and dirty, quick and dirty way to see if they line up properly, and they do. So there's those guys, and I also have an HA master from all the hydrogen data piled together, and I believe I put that in this folder. It was master part 1, part 2, HA registered, so that's this guy, and I'll stretch him. So there's the HA data. As you can see, this nice rotated square, I didn't do such a good job of putting my camera in the right orientation. Right, the image itself matches up, right, snaps right on top. But you can see there's this thing that I'm going to have to crop out because of poor framing on my part. It's just a laziness mistake on my end. Okay, so I have my masters. I have RGB and I have my HA stack. So there's a couple tasks I need to do. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to, let's see, where am I at? V3, and I'm going to make a text document that describes my process flow. This is going to be very handy. I would recommend everyone makes one of these, or what I have is actually, if you can hear, I actually have a paper version that I use. I have like a scientific style lab notebook that I do all my stuff in. So this is going to be called CCD, I like lowercase letters, CCD processing flow for Reddit. Alrighty. So step 1, what do? We inspect frames, and I used subframe selector, typing is hard, and blink to do that. After I know that I want to do it, I don't like that this is at the top, that's annoying. There we go. After I did that, I decided which ones I want to keep, which ones I throw away. I actually keep all of my subframes that I don't want. I don't delete them, just in case I ever do get bored and decide I want to calculate my efficiency, like number of frames kept divided by number of frames tossed or whatever, or divided by total later on. I can go back and look at it, and like I said in the previous video, hard drive space is cheap, so I don't give a shit. So inspect my frames. After I know I want, I use batch pre-processing scripts to stack, and then just to make sure, I inspect masters for correctness, I'll call it. Make sure the stacking process actually worked. And here's where you kind of need to make a decision as to how you're going to do this. Since I have HA and RGB, I want to make an HA-RGB image, right? I don't have any LUM data. I would like to, but I don't because weather sucks. So for now, I'm going to use a synthetic LUM from the RGB. So I need to make RGB, extract the LUM channel, which is really easy to do, and then I need to process the RGB for color data separately, and process the LUM separately. Okay, so that's my general flow. After I do that, then I need to recombine the LUM with the RGB, and then final touches, curves and saturation and whatnot. So that's a general structure, right? So we're at step 4, make the RGB and extract the LUM channel. So before I extract the LUM channel, before I do step 5 here, I want to take my HA and put it in the RGB, and I'm essentially going to supplement the R channel with some HA data because HA is a relatively red color, at least in the chrominance spectrum. That's where it's at, 656 nanometers. So Alright, so make the RGB, add the HA to it. So I guess I can do a 4A here. If you have HA, add HA to R, then make RGB. We'll just call that a little subscript. Alright, so then I gotta extract the lum from the corresponding HA-RGB and process the RGB separately and the lum separately. So that's our general structure. Let's go ahead and do step 4, make the RGB, and then add the HA to it. So the way that I do it, and I'm not an expert in all this stuff, but this is how I do it. I already have the master red, green, and blue, right? Blue, green, red, and everything's always RGB, so my anal retentiveness says that it should go R on top, G in the middle, blue on bottom. And I'm trying to make an HA-RGB, so guess where HA goes? Right there. Okay, so there's my masters. So there's a script that does it. It's really handy. It's called L-RGB combination, right? So you say, well, I don't have L, so there goes that. And red is my red channel. Green is my green channel. Blue is my blue channel. Okay. Blue, blue. Okay. I don't want to do any chrominance noise reduction because I'm going to do that on my own. I'm not going to let this tool bother with it. And I'm going to hit the little circle that says apply globally, which means apply to those 3 things and smash them together. Okay, doesn't take too long. That's cool. Do a quick screen transfer function, and you can see the data have been stacked properly. The stars are lined up. Everything is good. It is indeed a color image. If you can't tell this is blue, maybe this isn't the hobby for you. And now I have an RGB image. So I'm a save horse, so I Control-Shift save that guy. And this is here, and it's part 3. So I save this as RGB stack as just a fit. And that's how I do it. That's why I like to name it. I have a naming scheme that I use, and it works for me. You could do whatever you want. I'm going to minimize this because we'll probably come back to it later. Now I want to add the HA to this. Well, this is a stupid amount of blue, right? Everyone can see that. So before I add my HA, I'm going to take a quick deviation from this part, 4A. I'll call it 4B. Okay. If color, I need to do a background wipe. If background is absurd, DBE or ABE, whichever one works for you. Okay, I'm just going to do ABE for the purpose of this tutorial. I can do another one on AB and DB and how they work, but essentially it's going to remove the background, so it's great at removing gradients and light pollution and things like that. I use subtraction, usually works well enough for me, and I never replace the image because I'm a save horse and I like to save everything, do everything manually. Click and drag. It'll do a little bit of math. It'll say, okay, here's what your background looked like. You can see it's stupidly blue. And you can also see there's a gradient, right? If you see this bottom left, maybe 30%, it's kind of dark, and the middle is kind of light. That's a pretty wicked gradient. So sometimes I'll save this, but for now, goodbye. And then I'll hit Control-A to a screen transfer function. You can see there's still some gradients that show up. I'm not going to fiddle with those right now. If I did color calibration first and did a bunch of other steps, I can do that. For the purpose of just getting through this tutorial and not spending 4 hours on it, good enough, right? So this has already been saved, so I'll close it. This new image then, I save. It becomes RGB stack, and what have I done to it? I've done ABE, so it gets underscore ABE. That's my file nomenclature system. Okay, so now I have my RGB image to which I want to add my HA. So I want to take this guy and smash it onto here. Okay, and in order to do that, I want to use a script called narrowband NB-RGB combination, right? It stands for narrowband RGB combination. That's where you're adding like HA-O3, N2, S2, HB, all those different guys, even methane, I guess. All those different narrowband wavelengths or narrowband things to an RGB image. So I have to tell it what is the RGB source image that I'm talking about. Well, I'm talking about this guy, although this is referred to as the identifier. All right, let me just close this real quick to show you. I don't need that. The identifier is the text that's right here at the left of this line. So I don't know why PixInsight does this way, but it is what it is. It calls it image 5 ABE, right? But I'm just going to call this, I'm going to change the identifier to RGB stack, right? Just so I know that that's what it is. So when I use my narrowband script, the term that will pop up right here will be RGB stack. Makes it a little bit easier to work with. You don't have to do this, of course. Now, what do I want to do? I want to add HA to my red channel. So I pick my master HA. And if you notice, it does have subscript R in here, and there is a slight kind of thing I glossed over, which is because the camera orientation in my HA has actually been rotated a little bit, I have to register them to each other. I've done that on the back end outside of this video. But if you do all your data in one night, or if you're really good at lining up your camera, you won't have to worry about that step. So I'm just going to gloss over it. So I'm going to add my HA. The bandwidth, or the band gap or band pass, whatever you want to call it, of my HA filter is a 7 nanometer, although I don't really think it matters, honestly. And scale is essentially how much, right? Do you want to really go nuts and crank it up, or you want to like just a touch and just smoke it out a little bit? So you can play with the slider, and what I often do is I'll add the HA to my RGB image maybe 4 or 5 times. I'll do like 0.5, 1, 1.5, 4, and 10 or something, just to see how absurd it gets, and then I'll pick the one that I like. So for now, I'll just use the defaults. You don't hit the OK button here, even though that would make sense. You hit the apply button, which I think is stupid. They should change that. Maybe, I know a little Java, maybe I'll change it myself. Okay, smash them together, do a bunch of math, yay, okay, that's done. And the corresponding image that's generated is now an HA applied. So here's my original. You can see in the wispy arms, like right here, for example, there's something there. It's not terribly red, but you can see right here it's much more red. And you can also see the whole galaxy has kind of like a red cast as well. So there'll be a lot of color games we're going to have to play later on. But for now, you can see that the addition of the red did indeed make a difference. So this one's already been saved, so close he goes. And this one now gets saved as HA-RGB stack. Right. So now I know that the HA has been added to the RGB stack. That's how I do it. Alrighty, so come back to our flow. Make the RGB, add the HA. Now I need to extract the LUM channel so I could process the RGB and the LUM separate from each other. Okay, so I'm basically making a fork in the processing. These guys are all done now. I've used all of them, so I'm going to actually close them so we don't get confused, because we're probably going to generate a lot of files. Alrighty. Goodbye. This guy I already saved. I will actually change his identifier as well, because NBRGBC combination looks silly to me. So this is just HA-RGB stack. And I use the same name as the file name, but of course you don't have to. You can make it whatever you want. So to get the Loom file, it's really easy. You just go to Image, Extract, Lightness. Boom. So I'll do a screen stretch so we can see what we're working with. So if I just take the Luminance component of these data, I get this. So this now, I'll Control-Shift-S that guy. This is going to be what I call a synth LUM. And where did it come from? It came from the HA-RGB stack. Right? So this is how I like to name it. You can see I just deleted _L because that's how PixInsight wants to do it. But I do what I want. Alright, synth LUM from HA-RGB stack. So now I have two files that I'm really gonna process separately. So the first thing I want to do is I want to crop it the exact same way, because you can see there's clearly garbage in there going on in both ones. So one way when you're processing two things in parallel is to use dynamic crop. Okay, and I'll just use it on this guy. So let me just minimize this for a second. Put him over here. Dynamic crop. Alright, let's see. What are we doing? Oops. Reset him. Let's try that again. Reset him. And unfortunately I do have to do a decent amount of cropping in this image. That looks okay, and I'll keep a little bit of that star. This star goes bye-bye, but the big fatty I'll keep. Alright, so that's a crop I'm going to do. Now I want to do this exact same crop to this image too. So I could do two things. I can just either leave this open, right, click and drag the little triangle, click and drag the little triangle, or I can click and drag this to I don't know, the background, the desktop, whatever you want to call it, and it makes what we call a process. Then when I take that process and go, hi-ya, it crops it. Hi-ya. Oops, it's already active there, so I'll reset him. Oops, sorry about that. Cancel, no, I don't want to cancel, I just want to apply his setting. Stop it, do it. Thank you. Alright, so dynamic interfaces are weird. They have like rules and stuff about what you can do. Don't really understand why. Alright, so now I have two images that have the exact same dimensions. You can see they line up. There they go. This process, what I often do is I just put it like that. I say, okay, that process goes with dynamic crop, and they even got the same little icon so you can see what it is. Okay, so now I've done my cropping the same. Coming back to here, I have my extracted lum. I got to process this guy. I got to process this guy. And so this is where you really get into a lot of the really fine-tooth details of PixInsight. So there's a lot of different ways to process the images. I've been using Ron Brecher's method for synthetic lum RGB processing, but by no means am I an expert. So the process flow that I have for the lum, put my paper here and go to my lum. Okay, I'll write that out for you. So for step 6, that's where we're at. Extract lum, process lum. So 7. I'll do the lum first, and I'll do the RGB. So 7A, processing of lum. And I'll keep that the same. 7A. Deconvolution while linear. Deconvolution. Followed by stretching. That's a histogram stretch, so I'll write it out. Followed by whatever's next. Okay, followed by 7C, which is Ron is has better data and does better things than me. So he in his on his website has HDR for high dynamic range, with what I have here in my notes as 6 and 4 wavelet layers masks. That's what my notes say. I often actually don't even do that because I'm not good at it, so you guys don't get to learn it from me anyway. ACDNR, which is another noise reduction technique, which I've recently started doing for small scale noise. Then another stretch if necessary. Kind of depends on how good or how strong your original stretch was and what the quality of your data can support. Followed by some more denoise, TGV denoise, which is a really good one. And then last, doing a little bit of, let's see, that's AFG, a little bit of LHE, local histogram equalization, to kind of up the brightness or the contrast of some of the areas. So we got, that's the lum structure. So I did deconvolution in a previous video, so I'm just going to skip over that because it does take a long time to explain and do. I'm going to jump straight to the histogram stretch. So we got the lum. Remember, this is not a stretched image, it just looks like it. So yes, we're done with the dynamic crop. So remember, it's not stretched because if you hit Control screen transfer function and we did the reset, you hit reset, do it, reset. There we go. This is what the data actually look like, right? This little radiation symbol, silly radiation symbol, will show you what it looks like if you were to do a stretch. So let's actually do the stretch by histogram. We're talking about the lum, and this is what it looks like now. This is what the auto stretch would look like. Take these settings, put them down here. It's doubly stretched, right, because screen transfer and histogram are both doing it. So it'll turn black into a decent stretch. Go ahead and do it. And of course, immediately after I do anything, I automatically save. And this is synthetic lum from HA-RGB stack and stretched. Okay, I always use past tense because I already did it. Okay, there's that. Coming back here, HDR, which I'm not very good with, so I'm going to skip over. Again, this is Ron's processing method, so it's not my own. ACDNR is good, and then stretch again, and TGV and LHE. So I just recently started using ACDNR, but let's see how it goes. Kind of feel like a good joke would be ACDCNR, but no, a lot of people probably wouldn't like that. All right, ACDNR, where did I put that? Is that not one of my favorites? Oh yeah, there it is at the top. Okay. So this is not a chrominance layer, it's a lightness layer. You can apply a lightness mask, or I think you can use your own lightness mask. I've done that before. Here's the preview window, and let's see. I think what I did is I zoomed in on like a section that contains some nebula and some noise, right? So you can see the noise, something like that. When you toggle, right, by clicking the little preview, real-time preview, you can see what that effect is. It's kind of just a blurring effect, right? And you can also look at the galaxy or the spiral wispy arms of the galaxy and see what the effect of it there is. If I do it to the whole thing at once, make this a little bigger so it's easier to see. Okay, so off, on, off, on. So that does look a little bit better. And by changing iterations and some of these structure size, like let's turn this up to 12, right? Just something stupid. It's actually doing it. You can see it gets much blurrier. You can turn the structure size all the way down to 1. I don't know exactly how it calculates structures. I don't see that. Documentation for PixInsight isn't the best, unfortunately. Okay, so you can see it's a much less pronounced effect. So we'll go with 5 or go with the default. We'll apply our lightness mask, and you can of course play with the settings. So the lightness mask, you can look at what it is. White is what it's affected. Black is what is masked. So I wonder if you can change. So more strong of an effect, more blocking of an effect. You can essentially think of these as the 3 points on the histogram. The left black, the right white, and the middle. That changes the linearity. And you can just play with these until you get a mask that you think is appropriate. So we want the background to be white because that's what we're working on. We want to denoise that guy. And we don't want to do something like this, obviously, because then everything would get denoised. So maybe I'll do something like that. We'll just see what happens. So let's turn that preview off. So we'll go from this to that, this to that. It's a small thing, small effect. Might not be so easy to see in a video that's not perfectly HD quality, but it is what it is. Alright, so apply that guy. Do a little bit of work. The Luminance channel doesn't take as long as the RGB. Okay, as soon as it's done, immediately I always save it. This is ACDNR. Okay, and then where are we at? Jumping back here, ACDNR. Stretch again if necessary. I think it looks fine. I don't have strong preference for that. I don't need this process anymore, so I'm just going to delete it. ACDNR is done. I always delete my previews after each tool, even though I probably reuse previews a lot. It's just what I do. TGV is a cool tool as well for denoising. It's a very strong one. It's a very popular one too. So it has 2 modes, Luminance or RGB. We're obviously working in the Luminance layer. Again, I make previews of areas that I want to check out. Right. So if I do this, for example, right, that's not a good preview. Let me change preview. We'll do like Alt-N to make previews, by the way. Maybe we'll do something like that. Okay, so we have some galactic parts and we have some kind of backgroundy parts, right? So we got galaxy here and then I got backgroundy here. Iterations usually around 200, 250, something like that. I'll just say 200 for now. Local support, so TGV. To do TGV, you need a couple things. So let me jump to my notes real quick, page 6. You need what they call a local support image. So the easiest way to do that is to make if the image is stretched, just make a copy. If it's not, make a copy and then stretch it, and then save it as local support. Basically, it's kind of a baseline. This is what it used to look like. So when it does calculations, especially recursive calculations, it knows where it started from. It knows what its base case is. So I will just save this as TGV underscore local support. And I will also change the identifier to TGV local. I don't know why you can't put spaces in an identifier, by the way, right? So let me show you. If I try and just do TGV space local support, it'll error out on me. No, I don't like that. But got an extra L in there anyway. But if I put an underscore, then it's okay with it. So whatever. It is what it is. So there's my local support. That way when I click local support, oops, it says what is the actual support image you're talking about. You can have it right there, categorized by identifier rather than by file name. Okay, so that's that guy. Noise reduction, I'm usually dealing with really small scale noise, 1 pixel or so. So I just do 1, but you can tweak those as necessary. Then you go to your preview, and you want to test it. Usually I start out with -1 for edge protection and smoothness. These are values you'll have to measure on your own. You can measure with the statistics tool, but I'm not going to do that here. Right? Do our processing, and then I'll toggle Control-Shift-Z. So before and after. You can see it's essentially no difference. So I'll go up by a factor of 10. That's what these guys are. They're up by factors of 10. I'll do it again. Crank it out. And you just kind of feel it out, right? So this is where we start to get into the art realm. Way too blurry, right? Everything has just been blurred. So off, on, off, on. Look at like in here by the core. Blurry, not blurry. Blurry, not blurry. I mean, hopefully you can see that in the video. Right? Like all this, yeah, the noise goes away, but it's just way too strong. So something between 5 times 10 to the 0 and 5 times 10 to the negative 1. So I'll go a little stronger here. And I'm going down by a factor of 10. That's why I'm going up on these sliders. I'll just apply again. Okay. Processing again. And you'll play with the numbers till you get something you like. So off, on, off, on. You don't want to be too heavy-handed with noise reduction. Otherwise you get like weird blotchiness and stuff, especially if your data are not real good. If they're questionable, then it might even make it worse in terms of appearance. Yeah, technically it'll be less noisy, but the appearance might be worse. So you can see there's an effect here. I'm just going to go with it, right? Because this is just to demonstrate how the processing flow works. So once you have the whole thing done, click and drag and say do it to the whole thing. It does take a little while, so I'm not actually going to do it right now. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a different file that I've already done all these steps to. So close that. Close this guy because it's already done. And I'm going to jump to version 2, so part 3, version 2, and it was Synflum, crop, deconvolution, stretch, ACDNR, stretch again, TGV. Here we go. So this is the result of what I got when I did it, a different time, not for this video. Something like this. You can see the background's a little bit darker. So come in here. We did ACDNR, at least, we did a little bit. Stretch again, we just did TGV, now a little bit of LHE. LHE is a cool tool, I really like LHE. To do LHE, you need to have a mask. So one of the easiest ways to make that mask is through range selection. Of course, there's tons of different ways to make masks. The other one is local histogram equalization. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is say, select the stuff that you want to equalize, right? Select the part of the image through which you want to change the histogram of that part, right? So the white part is what you're operating on. So this would be just the core. This would be like the whole image. Obviously that makes no sense. Maybe this is just that part. You can see kind of noise and shit going on up there. You got that guy. So you just pick the part that you want to do the LHE upon. Once you do, you want to make it a little blurry so the mask bleeds nicely into the background image. You don't want to make it so blurry that it's like, what is that thing, right? You want to make it so you can kind of identify it, but that there's not sharp edges to your mask. Otherwise, it'll make the image not look good. Okay, so maybe that's a little, let's see. Yeah, maybe like that, right? And you can see how sharp that is. That's no good. And then obviously I already did the too blurry case, so something in between. Maybe, yeah, that looks good, I'll say. Yeah, that might be a little too sharp. Okay, that's good. Alright, so to make it, just hit the little square, make me that. Yay, there it is. Okay, this is my range mask. I save it because I'm safe for. So back in my V3, I have range mask. And I like to it's range mask for LHE. Okay. And then apply it. Boop. And then after I apply it, I check to see if it looks reasonable. Right? TGV local support. I'm done with that, so close that. So remember, Control K to show the existence of the mask. Either way, you know it's masked because the tab on the side is brown. If you want to just work on the background, instead of the selection, Control-Shift-I to invert the mask, or mask, invert mask, mask, invert mask, or you can hop back and forth. I want to work on this part here, so the red color annoys me, so that goes away. Alt-N to make a preview. Oops. Alt-N, not Control-N, sorry about that. I'll just galactic core, there's my preview. Okay. And now the local histogram, right? So if I take these settings, 64, 2, and 1, and I do apply those settings to the preview, this is what it looks like. So this is before, this is after, before and after. So it's really easy to go over the top here and say, oh, my image looks so awesome. Look at all this high contrast detail. But really it's just over processed, over saturated, and doesn't look good. At least not to me anyway. So change usually I drop the amount to like 0.2-ish. And what I do is I just get an idea of the scale in my image, right? So I go to kernel radius, turn it way down, turn the contrast limit way up. Give it a second to calculate. So kernel radius of 16 affects the part that's blinking right now, right? Turn the kernel radius way up to like the largest it goes pretty much. And then toggle it so you can see, to give you an idea of what you're talking about. What does it know of the structures that it's extracting from your image? How big does it call a spiral arm, for example? I like galaxies, so I do a lot of galaxy images. Once it's done calculating, if it can actually do freaking calculation. Okay, come on, you can do this. I believe in you. Just toggle back and forth to see what you get. Man, this is taking a long time. I wonder if it's stuck. Alright, so we'll jump down to what normal for me is in the 100 range. Alright, so I turn the contrast limit all the way up just so I can see what I'm working with. It's not that I'm actually going to do that, right? I just want to see what it is I'm working with. There we go. Okay. So at a kernel radius of 138, structures of blinky size are the ones that actually get worked upon. You can see it really does change the contrast. Like look at this little puff and then this puff down here, and look at this arm right here. Right? It goes from being faint to much more bright. So you can do a couple different iterations of this. You can do, sometimes I've done like, you'll do like maybe 50 to get the small scale stuff, right? It's more on the inside. And then you bump it up to like 120, 130, 140 to get the bigger stuff. And then of course you have to turn the contrast down to some reasonable value, right? And that's just reasonable is what you think looks good, right? And this is where the artistry side comes in, I suppose. So, okay, so oops. I think I might have just clicked this thing. Show masked result. Okay, there we go. So you got this, like that. And it's very easy to go overboard. Since this is just a LUM and we're going to add RGB data to it later on, I often try to, well, I'm not particularly great at it, but I try to go a little bit less on the contrast than I would like. If it was a final image, it might be a little different. But since it's just a component of a larger image that we're going to put together, then I go a little soft on it. So even that's kind of strong. So I might turn this down to like 0.12 or something. Okay, so one last check of my settings. Little spinning circle. Okay. So it's a boost, but not the end of the world. Okay. I will also check what it looks like for the whole image. Make sure it looks good and that something weird didn't happen. Okay, so that's after, before, after, before, after, before. Okay, and then click and drag to apply it. Again, I'm not going to actually do that right now because I've already done that. So instead, I'm going to actually open up the one that I've already done that for, and that was Synthlum, HB, TGB, LHE, this guy. Okay, so here it is. Here's the result of my THE, or excuse me, I'm LHE, so that's done and that's done. So I put my tools away, go over here. I always keep these out because I use them a lot. And so that's what we got. So that's coming back here, LHE. So we're done processing the LUM data. Okay. Next up is the process the RGB channel. So that's where we at 6A, and processing of RGB, or in this case it's actually HA-RGB because we do have that. 6A. Alright, jumping back to my notes. So the RGB, there's a lot of stuff you need to do here. So, first thing is color calibrate. Right, you got to tell it what's white, what's black, so it knows how to define the colors, because you actually have color to work with, unlike in the previous case where we didn't. Then that's when I do my stretch right after that, followed by a little bit of noise reduction, ACDNR. 6D is stretch again, if necessary, depending on your original stretch. And last, I like to do curves. So this is the way that I do it, and I stole that from Ron on his website, astrodoc.ca. Definitely check it out. Great stuff on there. Okay, so we color calibrate first. So this image is done, and you can see it's got a crazy long file name. My range mask is done, so I'll close that. This guy is the one waiting. And I'm just going to rename this identifier to Synthlum, just so it doesn't have a huge name. Alright, so here's my HA-RGB stack. First thing is color calibration. So it says pick a white reference, pick a background reference. So Alt-N to create a preview. There's my background, Alt-N. White reference, you just pick the center of the galaxy if you have a galaxy or a nebula. The center of the nebula. I'm not really sure exactly how it knows what white is by definition, but this is what I do and it works, so that's all I can do is throw my hands up and say, here's how I do it. Hopefully that helps you guys. So the white reference was preview 2. The background was preview 1. And I just leave the structure detection and all the regions of interest. I leave all that stuff at default and then go ahead and do it. And there's a slight change in the image. I don't know if you could see. If not, that's okay. And of course I save it because I save everything. And this is the HA-RGB stack. It's been cropped, so I also put cropped in there. But CC for color calibration. Once it knows what white is, what black is, now I can do a background neutralization. And the background for the reference is the one I've already just used, is the preview, so I'm using the same one. Do it to that guy. It's supposed to neutralize the background. You see it made that color gradient a little bit worse, so this could definitely use some DBE. Before I do anything though, I save it. Background neutralization. Okay, done. Put him over here in the done pile. So that's my CC and BN, so actually I probably should. And then put this in here as well. It's also where you want to remove your background before you do your stretch. So let me just see if I can do ABE again really quick on this guy and see what happens. See if it pulls out all that extra color. Looks like a damn rainbow. Okay, so here's the background. Oh, that's disgusting. Okay, and here's the corresponding subtracted image. Oh wow, actually it looks much better. So another passive ABD did really well. So close that guy, we're done with it, and this guy gets named. This is the HA-RGB cropped CC BN, and then I just did ABE, so it gets ABE. Alright, so you can see it's still got a little bit of red cast. That's from so much HA popping up in the galaxy, because I had a lot of HA data for this image. He's done, he goes back up there. And so that's done. Stretching, that's why we keep these tools aside. So here's what the data actually look like. I like to unlink the channels, right? If I link the channels, that means the stretchings are the same as each other, right? So you see where it puts the markers. If I cancel and I unlink the channels, I think the red's a little bit moved on this one, but it's really hard to tell. You take those settings, apply it to this guy. I'm talking about this guy, so it'll take this linear histogram that looks like this, and it'll turn into a nice, big, smooth, loopy looking thing like that. So let's apply it to that guy. It'll turn white, of course, because I'm doubly stretching it. There we go. So done stretching it. Once I do an operation, get saved. Okay, and now stretch, ACDNR, stretch again if necessary, and curves. So a lot of people go a little bit more heavy-handed with the noise reduction on the RGB image, which I can understand because you're just using it for color. You're not necessarily using it to try and get detail. That's what the Luminance channel is for. We'll do ACDNR on this one time. We'll see. So now we're talking about chrominance. We'll apply a lightness mask. Let's just see what happens. Let's take a second to look at it. Chrominance. Okay, there's what our lightness mask looks like. Get out of the way. Okay, and we'll toggle. You can see it blurs up the image a little bit, not too bad. I could probably go a little stronger on that. So maybe I'll do like 5 iterations. Okay. And then once I pick some settings that, like just like before, make it look good, stars don't get all wonky and the color looks good, and I get some denoising going on, say okay, take my settings, click and drag and say go ahead and go. I'm not actually going to do it again because it takes time to calculate, and this video is already almost an hour long. So um, let's see if I did that last time. Synthulum, RGB, stretched, and then I did a TGV instead of ACDNR because I found that worked better, or it worked better to my taste. So the result of the noise reduction step. Okay, so pretend I just did noise reduction. So here's my final RGB processed image. So this is what I get when I get to here, and then I did TGV instead of ACDNR. So stretch again if necessary. I don't think it's necessary. I think it looks good. We can do a little bit of curves to tweak it. So the curves tool, I like the way it does curves tool, much better than Photoshop, in my opinion. I'm a Photoshop hater. I tried to learn it. It just never clicked with me. We're working on the RGB channels, so make the background a little darker, a little brighter. Don't go nuts, right? Oops. Don't do stuff like this. You know, just, you can do all these things. You can be like, oh, look at all the color I've captured, right? Well, no, you're just oversaturating. Doesn't look good. Well, not to me anyway. To each his own, I suppose. All right, so I'm actually not going to bother the curves for this. I'll leave this out for later because I am going to use it, but just not right now. So this is real-time preview. Close that. The important part is how to combine this with this. Okay, so they're already lined up. Yes, yes, no. Get on there. I think they're already lined up if I remember. They look lined up. For some reason it's not like snapping to position for whatever reason. Let me try something real quick. I think they're lined up. Anyway, we're going to come back to our LRGB combination. There's actually two ways to do this. There's LRGB combination, and then there's another script that does it. It's called, where is that other script called? I can't remember the name right now. Render. I don't remember what that other script is because I use the LRGB combination. But anyway, you say, okay, deselect those guys. The Luminance channel is my synthulum. I don't need this anymore. And I apply globally, meaning I apply this to any, I don't really understand this tool, honestly. This part of it anyway. When you hit apply global, it knows it's going to apply this to this. But if you have 9 images open, which I've done in the past, I don't know how it knows, right? If you go to target and you say, this is the target I'm talking about, and this is the specific lum I'm talking about, and you hit apply global, it doesn't always work, right? This time it, yeah, see, it didn't work here. It didn't actually add the color to it. I don't know why. So the target has to be no view, and the lum will be your synth lum. And then when you hit apply global, it just, see, it's actually doing calculation. That didn't work either. It's weird. I don't know why it does this. So synth lum to the RGB, see if that works. I've had problems with this guy. There we go. I took the little tool and I dragged it onto here. So I said synthulum is, oops, I said synthulum is what I'm talking about. Apply that to this particular guy, and I dragged it onto the RGB. Okay, so that guy's done. This guy was the lum. I'm actually done with him now because he's been added back. So this is my final image, so I just, of course, save that because I'm a save whore. And I got to put it in the right spot, V3. And I call this the synth lum HA-RGB stack, right? Because it's been smashed together. Now if I want to do any noise reduction or any little crop, you can see right up here, got like a black line going on. I want to do my final touches. I want to do color saturation, right? I love to oversaturate things because I'm partially colorblind, so seeing color is not so easy for me. So I'm like, oh man, I love color. Let's jack up the color, brah. And just, you can do whatever you want, right? So you make them brighter and whatever. If your name is Dreams Please on Reddit, please make sure that you do this all the time because I know how you love your color, so you can make it look as stupid as you want. I'm not going to bother with color saturation in this case. Reset. But if you did want to do it, that's how you do it. And then the last step for me is curves. So I'll make this a little bit bigger. Okay. Just a touch bigger. And curves. So the RGB tool, I'll make the background a little bit darker, and I don't clip the blacks, don't make it look like that, but something maybe like this. Brighten the center a little bit, give it that sigmoidal shape. You can see there's a lot of faint wispy stuff out here, out here, out here, and out here that didn't really get captured just because I didn't capture any lum frames. So at least that's where I think it came from. Saturation, I'll bump saturation just a little bit, right? You don't want to go like crazy, right? That looks ridiculous. But maybe something like that. Little pinkish on the red, so maybe I'll tone it down a touch. The red, maybe I'll just drop the lower end and make the higher end a little bit higher. And so you just play with the lines, right? You want to make them look sigmoidal in general. If you don't like one of them, you can reset it and just too much red. That's probably just still a touch too much red. That looks better. Blue, I'll just bump the blue just a touch. I don't want to really tweak my background. Now you can see the green showing up, so I'll adjust the green as well. And you tweak the colors till you think it looks good. That's probably a little too much green, a little too much blue, a little too much red, right? Just play with the lines. Usually I notice that my RGB lines are almost always on top of each other, so that's one of the ways I can tell if I'm relatively balanced. Lightness, make the whole thing brighter, make the whole thing dimmer, right? Lightness is a tricky one, so core is a little too bright there. I lose some detail. And if you want to see your effects, you can off, on, off, on. You can see, looks like some detail goes away in the lightness, but the background gets clipped, so background probably a little too dark. Maybe a little too bright. So you play with the curves. Anyway, you guys know how to use curves. Anyway, so there's before, that's after. That's definitely too bright. Turn that lightness back down. Oh, there's two of them here, that's why. Pull that down as well. Yeah, whatever. Okay, we'll just say that's good. I don't know if it is, but apply it, do a calculation, and then your image is done. Okay, don't forget to save. Curves, past tense, done. And then also, don't forget, save this as JPEG so you can post it on Facebook and send it to your friends via email. That's it. Hope it was helpful, guys. I'll leave this up so you can have your last little look at it. You can pause the video now so you have, you know, the full processing scheme, at least how I do it, as stolen from Ron on Reddit. And if you guys have any questions or you want future videos, just message me on Reddit. My name's Yawg, Y-A-W-G. Is it 6669? I don't even remember. I have so many handles. But yeah, you can message me. I'm very active on the astrophotography and space only subs. So if you want specific, you want me to process your data or work on a specific tool that you don't understand, if I know how to do it and I can help you out, then I'll give you a shot. So good luck, guys. Let me know what you get.